Every organism has a unique ecosystem within which it lives. This ecosystem is its natural habitat. This is where the basic needs of the organism to survive are met, like food, water, shelter from the weather, and place to breed its young. All organisms need to adapt to their habitat to be able to survive. This means adapting to be able to survive the climatic conditions of the ecosystem, predators, and other species that compete for the same food and space. An adaptation is a modification or change in the organism's body or behavior that helps it to survive. An animal may adapt to its habitat in different ways. It may be a physical or structural adaptation, just as the limbs of birds have modified into wings, or the way the cheetah is shaped for running at a fast speed. ADHD is a disorder which presents itself with a series of different types of symptoms. They tend to fall into three categories. The first category would be inattentive symptoms, which are like not listening when spoken to, having difficulty maintaining focus on a task, and becoming bored with a task after only a few minutes. The second category would be hyperactive symptoms, which would be things like being constantly in motion, having difficulty doing quiet tasks or activities. The third one would be impulsive tasks, which would be like being very impatient, interrupting conversations, and having difficulty waiting for things that you want to do. People with ADHD have a variety of combinations of these different types of symptoms, so there's no one set type of ADHD. To say that someone has a particular symptom of ADHD, their behavior related to the symptom would have to actually interfere with their life in some way. It might be that they don't do their homework or aren't paying attention during the work day, or things along those lines, something that would actually cause a real problem in their life.
For most of us, when we purchase products, whether it's our iPhone or whether it's Nike sneakers, we really don't think about all that it took for that product to get there. Now most of us just see the sales part of it, but if you look at the system, it actually has a supply chain of what I call 4 pillars. There is the marketing pillar that actually sells the product. These are all the things that we're familiar with, whether it's online, where we get Amazon, and other online retailers that'll say customers like you also purchased this other product. It's going to the retail store and purchasing the product, but that's really the sales part of it. It's the marketing part that we actually see. Then there is the operations part that's actually involved in producing the product. Someone has to actually make it, whether it's the sneakers or the iPhone or the water bottle or whatever the product is. Then there's the sourcing, where materials have to be purchased from various global entities, various vendors. Materials have to be brought to where they're put together to make the product. And lastly, it has to be transported somewhere along the way. Shipping takes place, trucking, transportation, drones, whatever it is. And all these things have to work in unison.
Elementary particle physics is the study of fundamental particles and their interactions in nature. Those who study elementary particle physics differ from other physicists in the scale of the systems that they study. A particle physicist is not content with studying the microscopic world of cells, molecules, atoms, or even atomic nuclei. They are interested in physical processes that occur at scales even smaller than atomic nuclei. At the same time, they engage the most profound mysteries in nature and questions like, how did the universe begin? What explains the pattern of masses in the universe? An important step to answering these questions is to understand particles and their interactions. Particle interactions are expressed in terms of basic fundamental forces. In order of decreasing strength, these forces are the strong nuclear force, the electromagnetic force, the weak nuclear force, and the gravitational force.
In the past decade or two, teaching has changed significantly, so much in fact that schools may not be what some of us remember from our own childhood. Changes have affected both the opportunities and the challenges of teaching, as well as the attitudes, knowledge, and skills needed to prepare for a teaching career. There are more differences among students than there used to be. Diversity has made teaching more fulfilling as a career, but also made more challenging in certain respects. Classrooms, schools, and students use computers more often today than in the past for research, writing, communicating, and keeping records. Technology has created new ways for students to learn. It has also altered how teachers can teach most effectively, and even raised issues about what constitutes true teaching and learning. Both the public and educators themselves pay more attention than in the past to how to assess learning and good quality teaching. The attention has increased the importance of education to the public, and improved education for some students. But it has also created new constraints on what teachers teach and what students learn. Now more than ever, teachers are able to assess the quality of their own work as well as that of colleagues, and to take steps to improve it when necessary. Professionalism improves teaching, but by creating higher standards of practice, it also creates greater worries about whether particular teachers in schools are good enough.
VX is what is generally known as a nerve agent. Some people call them nerve gases, but in fact they are all liquids at normal temperatures. They are indelibly associated with war and weapons, though they have never been used in a conventional war. No one planned to make a nerve agent. The German chemist Gerhard Schrader was trying to make a synthetic insecticide that would be cheaper than nicotine. On December 23, 1936, he obtained a clear, colorless liquid, which in even very dilute solution killed 100% of leaf lice on contact. That wasn't all. Spilling even a tiny drop in the laboratory gave a vapor of which the first symptom noticed was power of sight to be much weakened in artificial light. Further tests on mammals showed it was far too toxic to be used as a commercial insecticide. The German armed forces saw its potential as a successor to chlorine and mustard gas as a weapon. They began constructing a plant to manufacture it in 1939. At least 10 workers were killed during the plant's operation. Fortunately, no nerve agent was used during World War II. For one thing, the Germans knew that the principles by which nerve agents worked were common knowledge, so they assumed that the Allied powers would have similar weapons too.
Street crime is relatively rare in Egypt. Most crimes reported in the press are either family dramas or con games of one kind or another. Drugs are illegal, though present in Egypt, and the users tend to be discreet. Even though there is visible presence of traffic police and police guards in areas where there are foreigners, still there are large areas of Cairo and many villages with no police presence at all. People are thus thrown back on their own resources to settle disputes, and there are well-known techniques of intervention to break up fistfights and of mediation for more complicated disputes. Even the police often act as mediators rather than prosecutors. In rural Upper Egypt in particular, disputes between extended families over property and power can develop into feuds. Social control appears to be maintained by a combination of strong values, expressed as Islamic, and by the constant presence of witnesses due to crowded streets and apartments. Anonymity in large Egyptian cities, let alone in villages, is nearly impossible. Perhaps another way to express the same point is to say that Cairo is a village of 15 million people. Alfred Nobel had written several wills during his lifetime, but the last one was dated November 27, 1895, a little over a year before he died. Nobel's last will left approximately 94% of his worth to the establishment of 5 prizes in physics, chemistry, physiology or medicine, literature, and peace to those who during the preceding year shall have conferred the greatest benefit on mankind. Though Nobel had proposed a very grandiose plan for the prizes in his will, there were a great many problems with the will. Relatives of Alfred Nobel were so shocked that many wanted the will contested. It was unclear in which country Alfred had his legal residence. He was a Swedish citizen until age 9, but after that he had lived in Russia, France, and Italy without becoming a citizen. Nobel had been making plans for a final home for himself in Sweden when he died. The location of residency would determine what country's laws would govern the will and the estate. If determined to be in France, the will would have been contested and French taxes would have been taken. The will did not state what should be done if no prize winners for a year were found. Because of the incompleteness and other obstacles presented by Alfred's will, it took 5 years of hurdles before the Nobel Foundation could be established and the first prizes awarded.
To study the conditions that promote delay of gratification or being satisfied, the American psychologist Walter and his colleagues designed an experimental test, in which a child is asked to choose between a larger treat, such as 2 cookies, and a smaller treat, such as 1 cookie. After stating a preference for the larger treat, the child learns that to obtain that treat, it is necessary to wait for the experimenter to return. The child is also told that if he or she signals the experimenter will return and the child will receive the smaller treat. Thus, the smaller treat is available now, but the larger treat requires waiting. To get the larger treat, the child must resist the temptation to get an immediate treat. That experimental situation has proven very useful both in demonstrating the importance of the ability to delay gratification, and in identifying strategies that make it possible for children to delay gratification. Children who were best able to wait in that situation when they were 4 years old are more socially and academically successful as high school students, and earn higher SAT scores. The situation, adapted for adolescents and teens, also revealed that middle and high school students who can wait a week for a monetary reward earn higher grades, show less problem behavior in school, and are less likely to use cigarettes, alcohol, and other drugs than their peers who choose not to wait.
We're looking at fat tissue, in particular, to see what controls how much fat people accumulate. We know that the more fat you have, the more detrimental that is to health. What we're able to do in a lab is take fat cells and grow them in the lab and see how they behave. We're quite interested in how natural steroids affect how fat tissue behaves. So we can see if you give steroids to fat tissue, whether they accumulate more fat and see how this changes their behavior. The idea is that if we can understand exactly how steroids work on fat tissue, we can design treatments that might help prevent people become overweight or obese. And perhaps reduce their risk of things like diabetes, which we know is quite related to exactly how much fat tissue you have. The other thing we're very interested in is where you have fat tissue, because not all fat tissue is the same. So fat tissue stored within the abdomen itself is much worse. Fat tissue around organs really does increase your risk of developing things like diabetes quite dramatically. On the other hand, if you store fat just underneath the skin, that's actually a much better place to store fat. If we can understand where this fat is stored, we can try and design treatments that selectively reduce one fat tissue deposit as opposed to another.
People are aging. There are a lot more people in the older generation who are living longer, but not necessarily staying healthy for a large part of their lives. We're trying to understand factors that contribute to the quality of their life. My current research is mainly looking at factors like stress and how it affects our immune system. So what I'm quite excited about is looking at older people and factors that are important to them. For one, we're looking at bereavement, or in other words a state of sorrow, and how that affects the immune system. Often after older people have had a bereavement they go quite quickly downhill themselves, often from pneumonia. So we're trying to understand, how does bereavement affect a particular cell that is good at fighting off pneumonia? Another thing that we're doing is we're looking at hip fracture in older people, which is again another common event, and we're trying to understand the impact of depression. Often people in hospital with a hip fracture develop depression, and these are the people that then go on to become frail a lot more quickly than others. They get infections, often these infections lead to death. We're trying to slow down that progression to frailty. If we can understand how these factors interact more, then we actually start doing something about it.
Is coin tossing truly random, or it's just our ignorance over the physical parameters? A famous mathematician began to study instances of change, questioning whether the things we think we know are, in fact, true. Like the coin toss, for example. Most people assume the toss of a coin is always a 50-50 probability, with a 50% chance it lands on heads, and a 50% chance it lands on tails. But our mathematician believes that the coin toss is not about probability at all. It is about physics, the coin, and how the tosser is actually throwing it. The majority of times, if a coin is heads up when it is flipped, it will remain heads up when it lands. Our mathematician has even trained himself to flip a coin and make it come up heads 10 out of 10 times. A similar effect is seen if the coin is spun. Because of the way most coins are made, the heads side can weigh more, which means it will fall on that side, leaving the other side up more often. Further, some magicians will have coins that are shaved, giving more weight to one side. It's possible to make things random. If you flip a coin quite vigorously, it's as close to being a fair event, 50-50, as I know, if you flip it and catch it on your hand. However, we usually don't do them vigorously. If you think about it the least little bit, you'll realize it's not random at all. In fact, there are people around carnivals who have been able to flip a coin and keep control over it. The point? It's not magic at all, it's math.
Well, people might be surprised to know that actually, our experience of taste begins extremely early, and in fact, it begins in the womb. For example, when a pregnant mother eats a very garlicky dinner, her fetus also experiences that garlicky taste within the amniotic fluid. So there are a variety of flavors that do pass through into the uterine environment and actually have been shown to affect babies' acceptance of those flavors after they've been born. Exposure is the way that we learn to like things. The evidence seems to suggest that that exposure can start in the womb. There are also some genetic differences in our ability to taste specific tastes, particularly bitter tastes. These are often quite obvious when you look at individual children and their willingness to try, for example, green vegetables. So there will be some children for whom, green vegetables might not be their favorite things, but they will accept them. And others who, for example, behave like you're trying to kill them. Those children are what we call super tasters, and they have a genetic predisposition to taste the bitter chemicals that are present, particularly in green vegetables, and will therefore of course find it much less easy to accept those kinds of vegetables into their daily diets.
A lot goes into creating an eye-catching, user-friendly website. Web developers and designers must work together to produce websites that will be located by search engines, engage customers, and stimulate conversions. Firstly, finding the right name for your brand is crucial. In addition to being memorable, a domain name needs to accurately reflect your brand's voice and be nearly impossible to misspell. A simple and unique name leads to a higher chance of being located in search engine results. Another important thing to remember during the process of website development is to create a clean, appealing design. A quality design is attractive and easy to read. Most importantly, a clean design helps viewers focus on the value of your brand and content. Color schemes are also important in a website design. Different colors have the ability to evoke emotional responses, such as calm, happiness, or frustration. When it comes to using colors in your website design, it's essential to consider your company's niche, target audience, branding, and the elements of color theory. Your website's design, navigation, and content must engage customers and inspire further interaction with your brand.